9:21 on News Radio 680 WPTF. This is You Don't Say. Mitch Kokai sitting in for Rick and Donna Martinez, and our special guest is Tony Williamson of Mandolin Central, sitting in here because, of course, coming up at the end of the month is the big IBMA event taking place in Raleigh. And Tony, we're going to be talking in just a bit about the mandolin you happen to be playing this morning, which is, as I said just a few minutes ago, far from cheap. But first, how about a song? I could vouch for it, folks. His fingers really do move that quickly on that, too. What's the name of that one, Tony?
That was Forked Deer. That's an old-time fiddle number.
All right. Well, what a great song, and played on a great instrument. Folks, if you look at this instrument that Tony's holding in his hand, it says the Gibson on it, and you might be familiar with the Gibson Guitar Company or Gibson mandolins, but this is a very special Gibson. Tell us about the Gibson Lloyd Loar mandolin.
Around the turn of the century, and from about 1900, 1917, there was a mandolin boom in this country that was beyond belief. There were orchestras in every major city. There were tens of thousands of mandolins made in the Northeast companies. But that boom sort of died out around 1917, 1918. It really started to diminish the interest in the mandolin, and the Gibson Company, which is, of course, the same Gibson Company that makes the famous Les Paul electric guitars and that's really famous still today. But the Gibson Company, in an attempt to try to preserve the mandolin boom, hired a man named Lloyd Loar to build a better mandolin. Lloyd Loar was an acoustical engineer. He was a genius, and he came to Gibson, and he took all the resources of that company and put it into roughly about 200, 250 really fine, exquisite mandolins. He nearly bankrupted Gibson. They fired him in 1925 and set about to making banjos and then electric guitars, and so the company survived. What happened with these mandolins is a lot of them wound up in the hands of country players, mainly because of a man named Bill Monroe. In 1943, Bill Monroe found one of these mandolins in a barbershop in Florida, and it was the perfect mandolin for his style of playing. It had the same kind of drive and timbre that his voice had, and because of his performance on that mandolin, which was remarkable, it became a very famous and the most sought-after mandolin of all time. So a lot of people call this the Stradivarius of the mandolins, and if you can find one, they're highly sought after by all the top players.
And in fact, if you said, I'd like to get a mandolin like that, be prepared to pull out your checkbook and write something well into the six figures to get one of these.
That's right. You can buy a small farm in Chatham County for what one of these mandolins would cost. But if you were to want to look at one and see one and maybe even consider buying one, I will have several on hand at the IBMA when I do my booth for Mandolin Central. That's mandolincentral.com, and we'll have a lot of exquisite mandolins down there for folks to look at.
And we're going to remind folks about that before we wrap up the hour, but that is correct that one of the things, in addition to playing fine mandolin, Tony runs Mandolin Central and does sell and exhibit some mandolins for those who are real players who are in the market for a fine mandolin. Tony Williamson certainly can help you out. In fact, you and I, very briefly, we were talking about this before we went on the air. We almost saw one of these lower mandolins take a sad spill the other night, and we were both happy to see that the person caught the mandolin before it hit the floor.
Oh, how tragic that would have been.
Oh, geez. So you mentioned Bill Monroe, and for folks who aren't familiar, one of the reasons why Bill Monroe would be of interest to a lot of people is that he was basically the inventor of bluegrass, coined the term because that was the name of his band, and really got this whole thing popularized.
Absolutely. Bill Monroe took his influences from the blues of the black players that he grew up with, the gospel music, the fiddling of his Uncle Pen, the country music of the time, say in the 1920s and early 30s. And Bill Monroe took all that and put a little extra pizzazz to it. He made it pop with different rhythms, faster rhythms, higher pitches, and this music, bluegrass, that's now so popular, came from his efforts in touring around. He also toured all the time. He played in every little town, and people loved him wherever he went, and he single-handedly popularized this music that later became bluegrass.
And another interesting thing about Bill Monroe, he and his brother played here at WPTF years ago. We're going to talk a little bit about WPTF's role in the history of bluegrass coming up in just a bit. Plus, of course, we will hear more tunes from Tony Williamson and tell you how you can hear him play later this month as part of the IBMA Festival. All of that coming up as You Don't Say continues on News Radio 680 WPTF.